Well, this week we're very excited to have David Goldenberg with us. He has a distinguished bio. He's a founding partner of VLP. He works with startups from formation through financing, M&A, and general contractual agreements, and counsels companies at all stages. One of the things that I love about him is that he gives his personalized insight into making the important decisions for you, and he advocates for his clients to achieve their goals. I met David at a coffee meeting for a professional network organization that we belong to, and he heads up the M&A division there and leads the group in San Francisco. So, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks, Jameson. Glad to be on here, and thanks for inviting me. So as you said, my name is David Goldenberg. I'm with a law firm called VLP Law Group. I'm a corporate attorney, and we specialize in helping businesses close deals and investors invest in companies. We help companies of all sizes raise capital, and we help companies up to 1,000, 200 to 1,000 in their general business matters. And then we also work, as you mentioned, on exit transactions, whether that's a merger, acquisition, acqui-hire, and we do those deals from anywhere from $1 million, transaction size up to about 100 million. I'm an ex-general counsel, and I really try to bring a business-oriented approach to what are often complex issues. People choose us because I've built a team within VLP that has billion-dollar deal experience, but we're really trying to focus on practical legal solutions. We work on things like setting up a new company, joint ventures, equity investments, your website, privacy policy, those kind of things, terms of service, significant customer agreements, and selling your company at the end. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay, great. So I was just explaining to David before the podcast that the whole reason behind this, the season here is that we want to put together a group of very high level vendors, of professionals that if you work with them, you will be successful as you start up your company and start growing and then scaling. And so I view David as one of these professionals in the corporate attorney field. So one of the, one of my mantras is always, especially since I do a lot of CFO advisory work and sometimes interim CFO work, and it's very high level, and usually very early stage companies will not engage with me. But what I always say is, all's well that begins well. And so if you start well and you get all the foundations in place, then you avoid a lot of headaches. What have you found with the work with your clients regarding that?
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of things that get said at the beginning. Like any new relationship is hard to change. Whether or not for better or for worse. If you and your co-founder, for instance, agree you're going to be 50-50. And you didn't put a lot of thought into that, and it turns out you're not both contributing half of the work effort to the company, someone's going to be upset about that, and that alone can tank the business. And founder divorces happen a lot. We work on them a lot. They're much harder to solve if you haven't thought about that what if at the beginning. So we get companies, for instance, that came in and they're 50-50 and fully vested. And unseating someone who's got half of your company, in fully vested equity who doesn't want to go is very difficult, right? Certainly vesting helps with that. Even that, though, is only part of the solution. So, we take all of our clients through a process where we ask them hard questions like, what happens if you want to quit? What happens if your co-founder gets hit by a bus? God forbid, right? But those kind of things happen, and we don't put, it's not like we're writing a 200-page manual on, what happens if there's, nuclear war or whatever. But, these things that happen a lot, like founders not getting along, are worth spending at least a little bit of time in deciding, how you want to treat that. So I agree with you 100%, James, that putting some thought into the beginning, I'll tell my founders, it's 10 to 20 times as expensive to solve if, at the back end, if you haven't solved it on the front end.
Something that I come across is clients will look at fees and they'll say, ooh, that's a lot. Or because I do a lot of CFO and finance work, I don't really do the accounting or the bookkeeping. I refer them out, and that's usually a lot cheaper. What do you do when a client comes to you and says, I don't need this high level stuff right now, I can't afford it? Do you say, yes, but you need to get it right? Or are there, lower level firms that you say, wow, this company, let's say, is really a startup, kind of pre-seed, and they haven't raised the money yet? Do you refer them to different attorneys that are a lot cheaper, to an online, like a LegalZoom,
right,
or something before they raise the seed or the Series A and say, right, I've gone too far already, like I need a corporate attorney, and they actually need to go back, 6 months to correct stuff already?
Yeah, it really depends on the need, right? So I would say, and it's very hard as a founder. I thought about that, and I think about this all the time. You don't even know what you don't know a lot of times as a founder, so you don't know, the questions you should be asking, even, so we could spend 15 minutes and you could come away from that saying, okay, I understand there's some risks and I'm willing to take them, and you paid, a couple $100, for just a little bit of time. In general, we're busy, right? So I don't want to take your money for something you don't need. If you call me up and you say, I'm a single person opening a cafe, yeah, you're probably okay with something like, one of these online services. Because there's not a lot of risk that, you're not worried about your co-founder leaving. You're not worried about a lot of the tax issues go away with one owner. So, some of those things are a lot, easier to solve, even if you don't get it perfectly right. It's easier to go back and fix. If you're smart and good at finance and good at reading instructions, you're probably more likely to get it right filling out those documents than, if you don't have those things, right? If you're terrible at paperwork and you're going to lose I have a client and she told me, she's like, my drawer eats paperwork, right? And I don't have anything from when we formed the company. And for us now, and they're trying to raise money and they'll like go back now and try to deal with that. It's gonna, you're going to make it easier for the investors to say no. Where the messier your backstory is. And so, it really, I would hope, for some of your clients or a lot of your clients that they're hoping to create something big and valuable one day. And, I think if you go back and asked, I don't know, the guy who started Airbnb, hey, would you have spent 10 grand to get all your documents right? I'm just throwing 10 grand out as a number. Like I have no idea, it could have cost 2,000 or whatever. But like, when your company's worth $50 billion, $10,000 isn't a lot of money and you should have spent it. And really, like we're talking about, what turns into 10% of a $50 billion company is worth getting right, So I really do think it depends. I'd say a 15-minute call, I give a free consultation to everybody. I'll spend 30 minutes with, most vetted, like if you're just not a total Yahoo. I think in that 30 minutes, hopefully we can figure out if you really need our service or, something like it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for the listeners out there, in VC land and fundraising land, there's, people at the seed stage, the A, the B, the C. When you think about fundraising, how do your services differ?
How do our services differ?
And maybe also from, I'm always thinking about the investment that's needed. How many hours are needed at seed and A and B, and how does it, how does it stack up? Like you've got the platform here, and then B, there's a little bit more, and then C, there's a little bit more.
Yeah. So how would I say this? I would say we are seen as a founder-friendly group for corporate and company clients. So one of the things that people come to us for are founders who are looking for protection from investors or structuring a deal so that they don't lose control of their company. And those things are hard to, that's not on Quora, right? That's not something you can get out of, a standard set of documents you download from Y Combinator or whatever, right? Like those kind of things are not online. They're online, but you have to know what to look for, and you have to know what they mean, and they're it's not some standard template you just fill in your name. And so we've done, giving the 10x voting stock to founders. We've done board seat, where the one founder has multiple board seats or multiple votes on the board. Some what I call advanced planning, founder preferred, which is good if you want to do some secondary. That is selling your stock to an investor in a later round of financing in a tax advantaged way. So all of those things are things that you want to think about early. And work into your round, and you want someone who's been on that road before, knows what to say to the investor, or at least how to, I can't guarantee your investor is going to agree. All I can say is, here are the best arguments you can make, and and see how it goes, right? And not every investor founder fit is going to work for every deal, right? That may not be the investor for you. If you want to make sure you have control of the company, and the investor wants to make sure they have control of the company, you guys aren't a good fit,
Yeah.
But outside of that, we can help with a lot of those things. And again, as those issues become more complicated, my biggest client now is, multi-unicorn or whatever, worth a couple $2 billion. And his, the board issues at that level are, in some ways easier and in some ways harder, right? The numbers are much bigger, right? So every kind of little, move in the chess game is much more important. But there's also less, they're not nickel and diming him for, all of your employee grants have to be on a standard vest, or, I need to approve, right? There's a lot more trust in the founder at that level. Right. So, but even there, we can help, again, navigate that.
I can talk from experience, having done work for a unicorn, that the outside legal counsel is very, very important, especially when you're starting to raise large sums of money in the 50 to 100 million range, plus potentially venture debt, and just getting these term sheets and being able to understand, what's market right now, what's market in 2021 versus 12 months ago, and it's changed significantly, and what can you push back on? And I think, even when there's a CFO present, you still want to have, a very experienced corporate attorney there. And I think especially when you go, down the levels a little bit to seed and series A, when, you might not have a CFO, you might not have somebody experienced, having an experienced corporate attorney, might even be more important.
It's something I think about all the time, and you're absolutely right. There's very few people in this world that are 100% on your side. And, literally my license rests on the fact that I am, on your side and no one else's side, right? I'm your zealous advocate. That's like the term that they use as a lawyer, right? Like I swing my sword for you only, right?
Yeah.
And I don't, that's why it's part of why we don't do a lot of equity deals, because that's another thing, lawyers are seen to, that it could compromise our judgment, right? If that's my, $100 million of stock on the line, I'm going to tell you to sell the company, or whatever. Right. So, but yeah, it's true. And so where you can't have a lot of advisors, I would say having one is good, and we, I've seen a lot, you've seen a lot too, a CFO is a good place to do it, but you're right. You probably, as an early stage company, don't need all that firepower, but you need something. Right?
Yeah. In the current environment, COVID, the markets are, there's kind of this dislocation with, the economy, but the markets are doing great, and SPACs are doing great, and M&A is doing great, or it's picking up again. How do you feel like you're most helpful to your clients?
Well, let's see. I mean, I see myself as a service provider, right? So, my goal is, I know we're expensive. So my goal really is to parachute in, to learn very quickly what it is that's your priority, right? So some of our clients, their priority is, a bare minimum coverage, right? Like no red flags. And then I want to sign it. I'll agree to everything that's remotely reasonable. I just want to get this deal signed, right? And for that, we can be very efficient if you tell us up front, that's what I'm looking for, right? Other clients, this is my bet the company. I want to die, still working for this company. It's most important to get this right. And, and so cost is not the most important item, for them. Other client speed is the most important, right? Like I need to sign this today, right? And there's only so much we can do, given like a same day turnaround or a 24-hour turnaround, right? So really the goal that we really try to do to add value is meet you, what does success look like for you, right? And then, help you get there, because, it's not my company at the end of the day, it's yours, and it's you that needs the help, and what do you want to do? I don't want to over or under provide the service, that you're looking for, right? So, and that's, I joke a lot of times that one of the skills I try to use is mind reading, but that's really like part of it, right? Is I really do try to get in the head of my clients to make sure we're meeting them where they are in terms of what they're looking for.
I'm a business owner, and I feel like what I have learned from owning my own company and having to make payroll every month and bootstrapping it I feel like my insights into business and companies and how CEOs think, has gone to the next 2 or 3 levels than just having been a CFO employee. And I know that you have, you've started this company and you're a partner. How do you feel like having done that has augmented your skill set as a lawyer?
Yeah. So, and I'd say as much, so that, to be honest, that's helped me with a lot of my law firm clients, right? So we now like help law firms, form, because I'm sort of deeply entrenched in law firm comp and how that works, and service provider comp generally, right? Like, which it all kind of works the same. Which is, maybe less directly relevant to your, startup clients, but for small businesses, it's great, right? Because I understand that very, intimately. I would say my general counsel experience has helped more directly on a lot of the corporate side. And that was because, I started at a big law firm. And when you're at the big firm, essentially there's kind of, it's a one straightforward path, right? You're punished for getting something wrong. And then otherwise, almost never thanked. I think I got 2 thank you cards in the 6 years I worked there, right, from clients. And, because and I understand that, we charge very high rates, and perfection and excellent service is expected, right? When I went in-house, and so I'm inside the company, so this now is inside a 50-person startup, which is where I worked for 3 years. And instead of worrying about every document being perfect, the CEO would come into my office and say, I need to sign this today to make my quarter, will I get sued? And going back to what I was saying before of like trying to, understand what the client's really looking for there, that's a very different question than, is the document done? Are you happy with it? Are all the changes that you want made? None of those were important, right? This was a baseline question of, will I, the CEO, get fired for signing this contract today because I want to sign it today, right now, in the form it is now, no more changes. And I think about that because that's probably how most CEOs approach every contract that they come to me with. They just don't know how to ask for that kind of service. So now I try to tease that out a bit to make sure, again, we're delivering that. In fact, when I onboard a new client, I send them a long memo of how to work with us, right? Here's words you can use that will guide our review to get you what you want, because again, that's my goal, right? My goal is to give you the service you're looking for.
David, is there anything that you want to add that we haven't talked about? Because I know we can talk about M&A and about fundraising and ad nauseum and how to do things properly, but I don't think that's part of this podcast. So,
well, let's see. I think, two of the things, at least, from some of the stuff we talked about before, one of them is, how to help your CEOs develop that judgment, right? So we could talk about that, right? Of when to call someone, of what to ask for. I think about that a lot because I deal with a lot of new and small clients, first time founders. And so, like I said, I worked a lot on that memo, which was just a sort of response to the things I had seen over and over. So that's something, we could spend some time on. The other was, I think that tension between trying to do it yourself, right? Because I think that's probably where a lot of people are nowadays, given what's on the internet. And I think about that all the time, right? Like anyone can download a stock purchase agreement, right? You just Google stock purchase agreement and then you fill in your name and the number of shares and, what could go wrong, right? Then, when you sit in my place for 20 plus years and you've worked with 500 companies and you've seen all the ways that it could go wrong, like it's not that simple, right? It's hard then, though, to translate that into the client calls me and they say, we're forming the company. And what they get back is that stock purchase agreement with the name and the number of shares filled in, right? They don't see the 20 years of filter, that I put on which stock purchase agreement to use, what questions to ask and not ask, those kind of things. And, it's hard to say that, and like without the CEO, again, to help them develop that judgment. When are you in a tricky situation? If you, I think you might know, no one thinks that it's going to happen to them, right? But if your founder's not your brother, right? If it's someone you met at a coding boot camp, if it's someone that, you worked with at your last company, but you were peers, if it's someone you don't know intimately, if you've never started a company before, if you've never been through an exit before, all of the, because the reality is that most of the work in these agreements, especially those foundational ones, you don't see till there's a founder divorce or there's an exit, right? And that's when everyone goes back and looks at all those documents and
everybody reads it for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. And if you haven't seen that process work its way through, then you're not going to know how important that is. So, and that's where it might be helpful, even if you don't use us for. I have a lot of clients that'll come to me and then they'll go to some online service, and they'll even have me check the documents, right? So, we can spend an hour checking your documents and give you that peace of mind, at least tell you what's missing or how it could be improved. And then you can say, no, I don't want to do it. I have clients, I just want to use the standard safe. Here's, okay, here's what we would change. That's okay. I don't want to change it. Again, knowing decision with, 20 minutes worth of work, to me seems like a good trade. Not every lawyer would be willing to kind of do that. A lot of lawyers say, I wouldn't do it. But I always find like you plant those seeds and, like one of my best clients now was actually someone I gave an hour's worth of help with at his first company. And he went through, he had a big law firm for that whole firm, that whole company. But when he formed his next company, he came to us. So I don't mind doing that.
From a CFO standpoint, I usually try to read everything because, it's the CEO and the CFO who go to jail, not the CEO alone. when I worked at another company that had internal counsel as well as external counsel, the chief legal counsel would always say, it's my job to keep you guys out of jail. Mm-hmm. So I felt like finally I had a little backup. To making sure everything was good. But like you said, it's really important. And part of my job as well is educating the CEO, having them understand the numbers. And I think, like you said, having that judgment, when I really want this sale, can we add it to this quarter so I can make the number instead of pushing it to the next quarter? Comes up every quarter. We get the same. I'm dealing with one of those today. We get those same kind of asks. And again, I think, while it's hard to say no, ultimately that benefits everybody. Again, keeping people out of jail is in everyone's best interests, or whatever, right? So and I think it's really interesting that you have, as soon as somebody starts working with you, you send them a sheet of, here are the terms and the words we use, and here's how to work most efficiently with us. I haven't seen anybody else do that, so that's very interesting. My goal really, I had a client call me last week, and he's a serial entrepreneur, right? So he's worked with lawyers before, and he told me, he said, I want every time you do something that the value you add is more than the cost I'm paying you, right? And even if that doesn't work 100% of the time, just setting that mindset, I thought was very eye-opening and very astute, the CEO, to think about things that way, right? So again, I try to bring that approach. And I think you can never underestimate the value of having somebody next to you negotiating term sheets, because you just need one little tweak, and instead of paying your lawyer $10,000, you've just saved $150.
There's there's a guy in our M&A group actually. Who talks about that all the time. I paid for my fee here and I paid for my whole fee there, just getting the, indemnity changed to this term, or, letting them sweep the cash off the table and selling the company, right? Which, again, for people who haven't been through an M&A, when you sell your whole company, you're also selling the bank account, right? And it's just one little line in the term sheet that you could say, like, cash free, right? And what that means is, if you have $300,000 in your bank account at the closing, that's your money, not buyers, right? And he's like, that paid my fee, so And you can. I was talking to a business partner of mine in the UK, and he has started. There must be close to 30 companies now, and he said a few years ago he bought a company a few years ago, and these guys slipped something through in the contract that he missed. And it was fine. It ended up being fine, but it nearly wasn't fine, and so it was very fine print, and he missed it. So the good and the bad of my job, right, is that we get paid to cross your T's better than most of the time you can, right? So not you, but my client. It's even I find it tedious to go through all the contracts and everything. It's a personality type, and it's funny. I type all the personalities on my team, and we're all very conscientious type people, and I think that's part of being a good lawyer, is having that attention to detail.
Yes, that's interesting. So, which personality profiling do you use?
Oh, we use DISC.
Okay.
Which I find, very, I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I am. Yeah.
Super helpful for just, everyday business interactions. Quickly getting a sense of what, it goes back to what I was saying before, trying to figure out what you want, who you are, how you approach the world.
Yeah.
So we have everyone on my team has some C. They're not necessarily all C dominant, but they all have C.
They all have C. Yeah. Financial analysts and accountants are usually, C's.
That's right.
I like, CS is good.
Sure.
For
team members.
For me, for team members. Yeah. And it's, I was listening to a podcast the other day about, it was a business buying podcast, and somebody was saying, if you're developing your company for sale, for the last 2 years, you'd better make sure that your contracts that you have with clients can move over to the next company.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And it's something we deal with all the time, and people don't even understand that that's a problem. Or they'll say, oh, it's all SaaS, there's no contract, right? Like, well, actually every SaaS service, has pages and pages, right? The terms of service is a contract. Yeah. That's what, just because you don't write your signature on it doesn't mean it's not a binding agreement. And vice versa. When you're developing your service, you can put whatever you want, not literally whatever you want, but you can design the terms of your contract with your customers however you want it to be. Just because so-and-so charges this way doesn't mean you have to. Just because so-and-so offers refunds doesn't mean you have to. And we can, work with companies to, help them develop the kinds of terms that they want.
And it's interesting because I used, I set up a contract template a couple of years ago, and I used a lawyer, but I never asked them about that. So I'm not sure if they put that in there or not. So I'm not sure if my contracts are actually transferable.
Oh, assignable, right? Yeah,
assignable. Yeah,
yeah.
So it's something I need to look at, and I think sometimes I don't, you never know if the attorney you use, has that in mind or not, right? I mean, you would assume that they would, but you never know.
No, I would not say that it's funny. I had a client, I remember, who called me and said, I just want you to look at these 3, sections, right? And then the contract and we did, and then the contract ran into trouble. And the client literally came back and said, why didn't you tell me that it didn't have a fee shifting provision, right? Which is that if you have to sue for non-payment or something, that in addition to getting my money, I'll get my attorney's fees covered, right? Because a lot of times what will happen is, let's say it's a $30,000 contract, which is a decent sized contract for somebody, but not enough to pay real legal fees, right? And so you end up, now the person hasn't paid, they owe you 30 grand, but it's going to cost you 30 grand to collect your 30 grand. Who's ever going to do that, right? But if you put this, again, it's 2 sentences into the contract that says, if I have to sue you for non-payment and I win, not only do you pay me the 30 grand, you're going to pay all my attorney's fees. And by the way, people pay a lot quicker when they see that, or they go to their attorney and it says that, because now, it's doubling up on the fees, or, and the interest provisions, or all those kind of things you can use as extra hammers. But and she complained that I didn't go change that term, right? And so it's like, I would not assume that your attorney is just, magically reading your mind, thinking that you plan on selling your business in 5 years, and so I should insert this term. I would not assume that. I certainly wouldn't think to put that in every contract that it's assignable, because it creates friction. Really, then you're going to come back to me and say, hey, everyone wants to take this term out. Like, why'd you put it in there? And so, there's no perfect contract, right? If there was one contract that worked for everybody, I wouldn't have a job. So everything's a balance, and it's a matter of figuring out what are the things you need for your, business. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit like, making sure that your employment contracts are up to snuff, because that's where you can really get into trouble. So would you recommend a review of contract templates every couple of years?
I think again, all that really depends on the size of your business. What are your hard moving levers, right? So certainly, if you haven't looked at, like, if you're an online service and haven't updated for your privacy sections in the last three years or so, you need to. Right? There's the big European privacy directive called GDPR, and then a new one in California called CCPA, and a new one that just got passed that's like an amendment to CCPA, and all of which require very specific things with penalties, like where individuals can come and sue you if your website doesn't have certain language in your terms of service and privacy policy. So, in that case, there was, now for the 10 years before that, there wasn't much that changed. Right. It was all contract law. So, you would have been fine for those 10 years. And then all of a sudden, the changes happen. And so the same thing with labor and employment. Right. California has very rapidly sort of changing rules on who can be a contractor. And then before that, for 20, for the entire rest of the time I practiced, it was one test, right? It was this very complicated, contractor test. And my experienced CEOs still use it because they can't believe that the law has changed. It was like, that's the old law. Like, it doesn't work that way anymore. But, and so it will, so maybe it's worth having, an hour call as to like, hey, what's changed in the last few years, or here's my business, and kind of like doing a review the same way you might, have an annual checkup with your doctor. Right. Yeah. Or your accountant, for your tax returns. Right. So I know my accountant at least sends me a long, questionnaire every year. Did you have, I don't know, gambling losses or, whatever, like, and they ask all these questions to try to root out if you have deductions that, you might not have thought of because you're not an accountant. Right. So it's the same thing, if you call up your lawyer and say, and your estate plan as well. Same kind of a thing. If you have a trust or whatever, review that with your estate planning attorney, because those laws change every couple of years. Yeah. Same idea. So not necessarily review all your contracts every couple of years, but if you're a business, if you had the same 5 employees for the last 10 years, your employment contracts aren't super critical, right? If you're, a maintenance company or whatever, and you've got like you're onboarding people every month, yeah, they're really important to get right. And wage and hour claims are going to be huge and really impactful on your, one class action lawsuit and you're toast. Yeah. Right. It's $1 million claim. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. And there's plenty of examples out there where that happens.
Yeah. Every day, those plaintiffs firms are out there because all they need is one disgruntled employee. And they can go back and sue for 3 years of every employee that ever worked there, every payroll that you missed, not giving them a meal and rest break, not giving them overtime when they deserved it, whatever it is, and that's, they get an hour of pay for every missed rest break. Yeah. Like, think about, you add that up for 3 years for every employee. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So we've been mostly talking about, relationships with the CEO and what should the CEO look for. What other risks do you see for a CEO that are out there that they could, that they could automate away in a way if they, got an attorney on their side?
Well, I'll tell you, there's not, I would say the highest value that we add, to be quite honest, is the counseling side of things, right? So the CEOs that we work with, very often, they're coming to us with the most important thing going on in their life at that time, right? I don't get called about, should I pay Joe, a $30,000 or a $35,000 salary, or what's they don't call us with those, I'm selling my company. What about this VC? How should I get this customer over the line? But it's not like this random, like $200 a month customer. It's, Nike wants to use our service or whatever. Right. Yeah. And so, they want to get that transaction, which is this huge transaction for them. Typically they want to get it done quickly and flawlessly. Right. Or at least as close to perfectly as they can. And that's what they're calling us for. They're calling it for us to deliver that, speed and perfection kind of every time. So that's a big piece of it. That part is the automated away piece, right? That is, you're going to call me up. I just got a term sheet from Sequoia, get me closed. Right. And you're all of, a bunch of stuff's going to happen. It's going to be a couple weeks, and the next thing you know, wires are going to hit your account, and you kind of didn't really know what happened. And next thing you know, you're signing 100 pages of documents, right? That doesn't mean it's easy. It just means like we do work on trying to abstract away a lot of the detail and really only surface to you what's important to you. That being said, when they call and what they're asking for, and what I'm on the phone with my clients about is, larger strategic advice. And, what I would say there is, while, I've got a team and we process documents and we do that well, I'm also a pretty smart guy who's seen a lot of different businesses and a lot of different types of situations. And, we tend to be a general resource for, a variety of issues. One of the reasons we're in this group, James, you and I, is that people call me for all kinds of needs. And my goal really is to provide them, again, one of the things I tell my clients is, you know, if I haven't learned it yet, I'm not going to learn it now. That is, I'm not going to waste your money on me trying to get up to speed on some new issue. I'm going to call the person who's done it for 20 years and get the 5-minute answer. You know, this is how you do that kind of a deal. Here's how I had a client, they came to us to sell their business. They made men's like grooming products. And the buyer asked if all their labels were done in accordance with FDA guidelines. You know, I didn't know FDA labeling for men's grooming products, but I found someone who did, you know, and, you know, for $1,000, that guy reviewed the labels, you know, and we got that done very efficiently. Yeah, exactly. Because that's what that person did all day. Right. And so I would say that's how we can really provide help, you know, and I think any good service provider would, right, is they're not gonna, you know, some clients want me to do everything, but very few. Most clients want the answer, you know, they want it done, and they want me to stand behind it, right, but not to actually do it.
Yeah. Just having that ecosystem, that network is really valuable as well.
Yes, it is.
Well, thanks so much for your time. You could, you know, mention it now as well, how people can get a hold of you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Email's the best. Let's see, you know, it's, if you Google David Goldenberg, startup attorney, you'll probably find me, or startup attorney San Francisco, you know, David Goldenberg, startup attorney San Francisco, if you can't remember it, but it's dgoldenberg@vlplawgroup.com is my email. Just tell them Jane sent you. And you'll get the I don't know if I don't have a promo code or anything. We don't really do that kind of stuff, but it will definitely get you in front of the line. But yeah, shoot me an email. You find me on LinkedIn. You can find me. That's pretty much the easiest place, and on Google.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, David.
Absolutely.
Yep.